Oh, all right.
Ah,
Here we are. We
here
are
we are
back.
again.
My,
Happy
my, my.
Sabbath.
You guys doing all right?
Doing wonderful, doing wonderful. Glad to be alive. We are just excited about being a part of Pastor Roundtable today.
Good. I hope the week has been well with everybody. Hey, we want to welcome our guest today. I'm seeing Roycelyn, classmate from Oakwood. Happy Sabbath from Maryland. See John Mills, Pastor John Mills. He has joined the team here at Pastors Roundtable and has been very instrumental in helping us move stuff forward. Good to see you, Pastor Mills. He is pastoring down in the off the west coast of Florida. In the Florida Conference. Good to have John with us there. I see Rebecca Boney. Good afternoon, Rebecca Boney. And there's Yvetta Harris Hodges from St. Louis, Missouri.
Yes, I don't know if you could hear me now. I think you could hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, well, this week has been a trying week for me today. I got news today that my uncle in Jamaica passed away. And so just got news today. I just spoke to him last week, and I tell you, he definitely was a warrior, person that had a heart for God, passionate about Jesus, passionate about family, and so he will be definitely missed. And it's my hope and prayer that when Jesus comes, we'll be there to see him. So that's how my week went.
Well, look, man, just know that you and the family, you're in our prayers, and we're praying that Lord will just send his comfort and everything that the family needs in times like this.
Yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate it so much.
Absolutely.
I need to fix something.
Okay.
I've been bombarded all week. So last week we were so happy to wish Dr. Henry happy birthday. I just got word that the video is sticking, so I'm not sure what that is. TJ, I don't know if you could help us with that, but it keeps saying it's sticking. But Dr. Henry, we wished you a happy birthday. Your birthday was last week Sabbath, if I'm correct, right?
That's right. Yes.
But my mother, she has been watching PRT. She's excited, proud of her son. And she celebrated her birthday last week, Friday, her 81st birthday. And I was remiss in sharing with our PRT family, wishing her a happy birthday. So she reminded me today that I need to make sure I correct that. So for my mom, 81st birthday, we want to wish her all the best in this 81st year that God has allowed you to see. She watches us from the island of Trinidad. So she gets on every Sabbath and watches us from the island of Trinidad. And then she has a list of things that she tells me of what she hears on the show and questions she has. I have to go through the whole thing again with her every Sabbath afternoon. But it's a good ritual that I enjoy. So, Mom, happy birthday. Sorry I missed it last week.
Oh, boy.
But I charge it to the head, not to the heart.
Hey, look, we're just going to do a soft restart right quick. If those of you who started seeing this stream a few minutes ago lost us, we should be back right now. We know that we lost a few of you. Somehow the stream looked like it was just kind of cycling, going over and over from the first part. I am hoping that now the stream is doing what it was intended to do.
Did you restart already?
Yeah, I just restarted it. I shut it down on Restream and just restarted it on Restream. And so I'm going to see if that's going to fix that.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't fix it, looks like we've got got a few people who have rejoined us already. I'm watching this on my Facebook end, and it is still just cycling through the. No, there we are. All right.
Back.
I think we're back.
So will we need to reshare?
Yes, because it's going to be a different link. Actually, it's playing from the very beginning right now on my on my end. but it's probably about a minute behind us. Anyway, let's go on, gentlemen, and we'll probably get some comments in the chat from our audience. So let us know what's happening for them on their end. All right. We see a comment from Erica Can I hear? Let's put it on the screen. Anybody want to take a Conover? Can't wait to hear from Kathleen Crowley. That's one of our guests for today. Hey, listen, gentlemen, before we get into the topic and the guest that's on the table, no, the topic that's on the table. The guests are not on the table. The guests are
around
at the
table.
All right. It's coming out very choppy. We're hearing that. Hopefully that's going to clear up shortly. But let's talk about really quickly last week, guys. How'd last week go? Last week, what were we talking about? Who was at the table? What was the topic for last week? And how can our audience go ahead and check that out if they missed it last week?
Go ahead. I'm trying to start to get some of these shares out again.
Okay, we can't hear you now, Dr. Henry. Oh boy.
Hey, listen,
Doctor,
I'm trying to figure out what happened last week, man.
So last week we had with us Dr. Roger Hernandez and Kirk Nugent with us on last week. We had a wonderful discussion. Basically, we were talking about where do we go from here as churches begin to reopen up when it comes to the mission of the church, when it comes to the ministry of the church. How do we move? Do we just go back to where we were? What we heard last week, I think it was Dr. Hernandez that just put it out there. He said, look, a lot of people were looking at this pandemic and the closing down of churches as just an interruption. In other words, something that happened that now that it's over, we just get back to where we were. I think he was clear and he laid it down. This was not an interruption. This was a disruption. That it was disrupting where we were and what we were doing, and it's given us an opportunity to really kind of recalibrate mission and how we approach mission from the local church level, from the local member in the pew, all the way up the denominational structure. That it's so many of those points that we are looking at just reimagining how we engage. We're not reimagining the mission. The mission is clear, but what we are reimagining is the delivery systems that we engage in sharing with people the message about a soon coming Savior. And so it was a very intriguing conversation. So much of it had to do with technology and what we do in the virtual space. And Kirk Nugent, virtual space guru, he had so many bombs he was kind of dropping that were very key to being successful in engaging that mission in this virtual space. So if you missed it last week, we want you to go back to the YouTube channel, Pastors Roundtable, or here on Facebook. You can go back and watch that and get some good stuff to kind of help us chart where we go from here. So again, a thank you so much to Pastor Dr. Roger Hernandez and to Kirk Nugent for joining us on last week. So that's what was going on at the table last week. What's at the table? No. What's on the table for today? What's on the table for today?
Today, as you know, this month has been considered the Mental Health Awareness Month. And coming out of the pandemic, we have been hearing all sorts of things in terms of how people are dealing with the pandemic. We have heard new terminology that's part of our vocabulary now. Your mic, you're muted. Are we meeting in Zoom, virtual meetings? I'm right. Zoomed out. I'm Zoom bombed. We're dealing with virtual life, but one of the things we really did not take time to talk about was how it affected our mental health. Now, that's just the pandemic piece of it.
Right.
But there are things that are happening in life that we consider trauma. And now we want to we're going to cross a bridge today and talk a little bit about mental health and trauma and how that is affecting us as individuals. So that's what's on the table today.
Whoo, boy, it sounds heavy, but it's
That's
going
a
to be
lot.
good. I'm being good. So,
That's a
Dr.
lot.
Henry, tell us who is at the table. That's what's on the table, but who do we have at the table today?
Well, again, we are blessed to have people not only who are qualified, but people who are passionate about Jesus. At first, we have Dr. Nina Nelson Barfield, who's an associate professor in the Southern Union, Southern Adventist University. She works in the social work department. And she is excited to be with us. If you want to know a little bit about mental health and how that goes, I mean, we're talking to the right
That's
person.
awesome.
She deals with the students' research and all of that. And then the next person, oh my goodness, we are again just blessed. I was in my workers' meeting. We had a workers' meeting the other day, and we brought on Kathleen Crowley, who
Wow.
is a clinical supervisor over there in Silver Springs, Maryland. And she just, I tell you, she had about, I think she gave us about 10 or 15 minutes. But what she said in those 15 minutes, I mean, just kind of just changed our perspective and allowed us to know that taking care of your mental health as a pastor
Mercy.
is very important. Anybody is important, but when you're a pastor, a high stressful job, it's very important to take care of your mental health. And so we have with us Kathleen Crowley, clinical supervisor, licensed clinical social worker, and a whole other degrees that she had. Both of them are just a blessing
Hey,
to have.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. Listen, we hope that you are ready. Those of you that are watching, we need you to do something for us, though. Before we bring our guests on, have our word of prayer, we need you to go ahead and share this stream, because this is going to be a great conversation. So go ahead and share the stream. I want you to hit that like button. That's going to help it show up in other people's streams just automatically from the algorithms that both YouTube and Facebook use. So if you would do that for us, that'll be a great help, just to share it for somebody, put it in somebody's stream. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and copy that link and email it, text it, I don't know, WhatsApp it, whatever it is that you do to somebody so that they can be a part of this discussion. It sounds like this might be a good discussion for your pastor to be able to hear. I don't know if we're going to get so much in that, but make sure that you share that as far and wide as you can. And at this time, we're going to bring on our guest. Boom, there they are. We are excited to have them with us today. Listen, before we bring them on just to talk, let's have a word of prayer before we get into this discussion, and then we're going to jump right in. Let's pray. Father, we ask that you be with us now in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, I'm going to start with Kathleen. We did not really read out your full resume. We didn't tell everybody everything. So we're going to give you both, Kathleen and Dr. Nina, we're going to give you both about 45 seconds. Actually, we're going to give you 45.7 seconds apiece to just go ahead and give a shout out, say hello to whoever you want to say hello to, or maybe just tell us something more about where you are and what you're doing. Just greet the audience in your own special way. Kathleen, the time is yours now.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm the clinical supervisor for LifeWorks Strategies Employee Assistance Program for Adventist Healthcare, and we are located in Montgomery County, Maryland, and we have several hospitals. And so that's about 6,000 employees. And then we're also the EAP for about 80 external organizations. And we've been doing a lot of work with our leadership and with our frontline workers around this very topic today. So I'm super excited to talk about it. Thanks for having me.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Dr. Nina.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm currently teaching at Southern Adventist University in the School of Social Work. One of the things that we've been doing in the last couple of years is taking a trauma-informed approach to teaching. And apart from teaching, I'm involved in two research projects. One looking at how SDA churches that are becoming multiracial or multicultural or multi-immigrant generation, how are they responding to these changes and the recent changes associated with racism and social justice.
Wow.
I'm also involved in a community project. We received some pilot funding. That's the city of Chattanooga on preventing evictions. And so
Mm.
Southern Adventist University is partnering with a community agency to see how well that project is helping people stay housed. I'm happy to be here.
Very
Wow,
nice.
wow, wow. That all of that sounds exciting. I just feel like we are blessed just to have both of you ladies with us today. And we're excited to go and dig in on this topic. So, Dr. Henry, where are we starting today, Doc?
Well, let's begin again. Such a privilege to have both of you on. It's my first time meeting Dr. Nelson Barfield. I did meet on Zoom, Kathleen Crowley, Dr. Crowley, and you did a fabulous job to our workers just the other day. I mean, very passionate, and I'm sure that we're going to enjoy both of you as you give us, information on mental health. And so we're dealing with this word, mental health. They have deemed this month Mental Health Awareness Month. Can you define mental health? What does that mean? And then, as you define mental health, there's this trauma. We've been hearing about trauma, especially during the COVID-19, and then with the social unrest. We've been hearing about trauma, mass shootings, and all kind. Define these words for us so that we can understand what we're dealing with. We'll start off with anyone, Dr. Nina Nelson, if you could, just start us off.
I was going to defer to
Dr.
Kathleen.
Crowley. Okay, with anyone,
I'm
Dr. Crowley.
I'm happy
You
to.
better go ahead and then I'll jump in. I think her
Okay, no
clinical
problem.
perspectives will be very illuminating. I'll jump in after. Go
No,
ahead.
no pressure, no pressure.
Okay.
So when I think of mental health, it's something that goes unnoticed when we have it, right? It's something
Hmm.
that we take for granted. So what does it look like? Mental health is the ability to learn, to feel, to express, and manage a range of positive and negative emotions. When you have your mental health, you can navigate those. You can navigate your positive and your negative. It's also the ability to form and maintain good relationships with others. You're
Mm, wow.
confident when you're faced with new situations or people, and optimism is felt, right? You're always filled with hope, or if something goes wrong, oh, that's okay. Do better next time. That's mental health. You don't blame yourself. You set goals. You feel confident, and you have good self-esteem. And it's the ability to cope and manage and change with uncertainty. But when it's lost, it does become noticed. Maybe
Wow.
not always to you, but others may notice it in you, right? They may notice a change. You may lose your focus. You may experience some mood changes. Your relationships may suffer. Your ability to cope with those changes goes way down. And think about all the changes that we've had to go
Yes.
through this year. Holy moly. And and I appreciate that you talked about it's not just the pandemic that's happened this year. It's been everything. It's been the need for the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's been the pandemic. It has been the violence we've seen in this country. It is the divisive political environment, layer upon layer. So if somebody has good mental health, they've been really able to manage through, as difficult as that is. Somebody with not so good mental health or is struggling with these challenges, it just weighs that much heavier on someone. And the importance of your mental health, well, what are we without it? It's a difficult statement to argue. We need it to function, and we need it to function well. And then I'll go into trauma, but I wanted to give the doctor some a chance as well to talk about mental health.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and certainly that we tend not to notice. Most times we think of mental health, we think of it more in the negative, poor
Yeah.
mental health rather than good mental health. But the word itself is neutral and definitely has to do with our overall well-being, our ability to appreciate and recognize reality, as well as how we respond and process information. Did you want to go ahead and talk about trauma, Kathleen?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We've seen plenty of it, haven't we? And as I mentioned, all the other things that we've seen this past year and a half, it's not just, I say just the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic is a pandemic after all, right? But my organization with whom I'm affiliated, the Employee Assistance Professional Association, they came out very early on to recognize the pandemic as trauma. And so we have therefore treated it as such. And when we talk about trauma, it's really a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. It's emotional and it's psychological, and it's the result of extraordinary stressful events that shatter your sense of security. I'm going to say that again. It shatters your sense of security.
Wow.
And it makes you feel helpless in a very dangerous world. And so it can shift you, and it can leave you struggling with upsetting emotions and maybe even trigger some memories. And it's just anxiety that just won't go away. And so when the Employee Assistance Program or Professional Association recognized it as trauma, we treated it as such. And we know about trauma as mental health professionals, and I know the doctor will agree with me, the earlier intervention, the better the longer term outcomes. And so most people don't recognize it in themselves, or they don't seek help. And that's why we're having this mental health awareness month, is to get people to where they need to be. And most don't seek the help, although I think it's getting better. But I like to think of trauma as, if we were bleeding, our normal response is to go get stitched.
Yes.
Right? But if we're suffering trauma emotionally, that's not our normal response. We need to change that. And we're doing that here today too. So I applaud it. Doctor?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in to say that trauma can be considered simple in terms of you're just exposed to one sort of thing that is upsetting or harmful or threatening. But some people have what's called complex trauma. They are exposed to multiple things simultaneously or perhaps in succession that are threatening. So, for example, they can live in an area where there is frequent crime, and they're constantly navigating shootings. At the same time, they may be the victim of assault or some kind of crime. And so people can, and then they could experience a natural disaster. So people can experience complex trauma when they're exposed to several different types of things. The other thing is that for some people, the traumatic event can be a one-time event. For other people, the thing that is traumatizing is chronic. For example, people who are living in a domestic violence situation, or children who are experiencing some form of child abuse or neglect. And so those are also important things to remember.
Wow.
And as Kathleen spoke about, our bodies are designed to respond to trauma as it would with any kind of stress. So typically when you experience a stressful event, which a trauma is, your body goes into overgear to prepare you to fight or to flee. So your heart rate goes up. You begin to be able to breathe quicker. Your body activates your sugar so that you can respond quickly. Those are natural, God designed responses to stress. And so the expectation is that that thing will reside or resolve soon, and your body's kind of able to come down. When you're exposed to a chronic stressor, or if you've been exposed to a traumatic event that you're constantly triggered by the memories, your body keeps going back through that stress response. And if your body is working overtime like that, your heart rate is elevated, etc., your blood sugars are high, you are going to get physically ill, and that's going to wear you down. And so this is why it's important for us to pay attention to even low grade trauma that might become chronic over time, or people who have experienced trauma that they've never received treatment for, and they're constantly being triggered. And that's something to be concerned about.
Wow, that's interesting, and that's a great segue into our next question. I just see a comment here. Apparently, we're having some connection issues. Hugh Allen says the video interruptions are challenging my mental health presently. So we hope that will be alleviated soon with this the network here.
Well,
And
Pastor
by the
Paul,
way,
Pastor Paul, before you move on, I just
yeah.
want to, we threw out the word trauma, and as I'm sitting here thinking about that word trauma. Normally, when when I used to think of a trauma, it had to be a very significant situation that causes me to really wow, or my body go crazy, injury, or a storm that is just scary. But what I'm hearing now is that pretty much you said something about a low I'm not sure exactly the term you used, Dr. Nelson, but it was that you can have trauma that is not as stressful in when you look at it while it's happening, but when you look back it can be a
Hmm.
trigger that causes the body to react in a certain way. What can you share with us that can not allow us to be oversensitive, that we would think that everything we see is trauma? We could take it the other way.
Yeah, that's
All
right.
of a sudden there's no toilet paper at Sam's. That's trauma for some
That's
people.
trauma.
Pastor
you
Wade
know
didn't say happy Sabbath to me at church this morning. I'm
oh,
traumatized by
that's
that.
trauma for
Right,
some
right.
people. What are some of the things we need to be careful about in trying to move everything into a trauma situation?
I think, if I may, doctor, if I can
Yeah.
step in, I think it's a great question because we don't have to pathologize everything, right? Not everything is, I think when most people think of trauma, they think of PTSD, they think of post-traumatic stress disorder. You can have trauma and you can be stressed by it. Yeah. And then there are people that can go on and have real severe trauma and be and get a clinical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay. So not like you said, not everything has to be so traumatic that you get a clinical diagnosis and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, right? So there's a different level of symptoms. You could have trouble sleeping, some changes in appetite, feeling anxious or fearful, being on edge, overly alert, irritable, cranky, maybe not being able to focus, difficulty with decisions. Those might be some things that might show that you're having some stress, that you've witnessed some trauma, but not that you've gone over to the extreme of post-traumatic stress disorder, where it's really, post-traumatic stress disorder would be something that you're really impaired. It really makes it difficult. Dr. Nelson, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we need to make a distinction between the event, what it was that seemed threatening or harmful to us, and people's response.
Hmm.
So depending on what it is, like you've lost a loved one or you were in a car accident, it's normal to have some kind of prolonged stress response for a while. Like you might be afraid of driving for the next couple of weeks. 2 years, 3 years down, probably if you're still scared of driving and just the sound of a car driving down your street makes you can't come out of the house, then you're like, okay, this is beyond what I should expect, and I need to seek help. The other thing to mention is this concept of resilience. So resilience talks about people's ability to bounce back and to persevere and
Wow.
thrive despite trauma. So not everyone who's experienced a severe traumatic event will end up having some kind of severe chronic stress response where they can't function. And researchers are very interested to know, why is it that your child got murdered and you seem to have picked up the pieces and move on, but not an next person? And that has to do with the whole issue of resilience. And um, key to this concept of resilience is that in the face of trauma, we're looking at the balance of what are called protective factors. And protective factors are things that enable us to overcome adversity versus what we call like the risk factors, the things that make responding to the adversity worse or put you in an adverse position. And the beautiful thing that we are learning is that we can increase the protective factors by things that we do personally or in communities or churches, so that people who undergo stress and any kind of traumatic event, they can grow and overcome. So that's an important term to remember, this concept of resilience.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. The idea of resilience is to go back to your original state, right? And I feel the same way, doctor, about the idea that we can grow and we can be more than just resilient. It's something that I've been preaching, if you will, to the frontline workers about. This is something, it can be a growth experience for you, that you don't have to be just resilient. You don't have to go back to the way you were, because I'd like to think that we've all changed from this past year and a half. And the goal would be to be better than we were. And ways that we can do that, ways that we can grow through trauma, is by looking for beauty in your everyday, finding meaning and purpose. Viktor Frankl, a famous psychiatrist that went through the Holocaust, he talks about that, right? He talks about finding your beauty and your purpose in your everyday. That helps you to be even more resilient, if you will.
Yeah. I saw a quick question come up about, what about post-traumatic stress disorder in teens?
Yes.
People of any age can suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Most people often think of it as, or originally are often associated with veterans and persons returning from war, but any kind of traumatic event can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. So if we're seeing a lot of, and I'm not remembering all of them, but constant intrusive thoughts, a lot of hypervigilance. I can't remember what's the third thing associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. But yes, anyone of any age. In fact, many children who suffered neglect and physical abuse and sexual abuse do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and as well as many persons who have grown up in high crime areas actually are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow. All right. I hope, and I know that we're going to talk in a little bit about some ways to diagnose or to figure some of those things out. But before we get to that, I'm curious, and this might be the chicken and the egg conversation here, but when it comes to trauma and mental health, and I'm gonna impose, when we're talking about bad mental health. By the way, and I'm glad you addressed this earlier, Dr. Nelson, when you mentioned that mental health is kind of a benign type of a term, but when growing up, we hear mental health, we're like, yo, that brother's crazy. You talking about his mental, he's got a mental health issue, or he's got issues or problems. It's a mental health thing. We always thought of it as a negative connotation. And I'm going to use that for now. So when we talk about trauma and its connection to particularly a poor mental health, which comes first? Is it poor mental health puts people in a position where they experience more traumatic events? They maybe make decisions or bad decisions or things that bring on traumatic situations? Or is it traumatic situations happen and those impact people's mental health negatively? Or can it work both ways? How would we discuss the relationship between mental health and traumatic situations?
Well, I'll step in. I think that the idea is the answer to your question is yes, plain and simple. I think I think the idea here is that anybody can suffer from a traumatic event or see anything as trauma to them. It's a very personalized thing, right? What is traumatic to me might not be traumatic to Dr. Nelson. And we might both have good mental health. And so it depends on just our ability to tolerate or what that trauma is to us. Now, if somebody doesn't have good mental health, maybe they have an inability to cope, and that could come from nature versus nurture. It could be from their environment. It could be from the way they were taught. Maybe they witnessed those in either their parents or someone in a parenting role who didn't have good coping skills, and so they learned that. And so maybe a traumatic event would be different for them. Maybe they would have less coping skills in order to handle that. So it really depends. It's a very personal thing for someone with good mental health about what is trauma to them, but also the idea of if I have poor coping skills, or if I biologically I'm not made up to deal well with certain things, my chemistry is off, that could be an issue as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and what I mentioned earlier about this balance of protective versus risk factors. So if you say take something like a job loss, if you lose your job, but your support systems are very small, so you have very few people who can step in to like help you with food, or you're not near like a food bank, and you don't have someone who can drive you around, help you to apply for jobs. That's a different situation from somebody who loses their job and they have lots of social support. So that's what we're talking about. That can be the difference. And there are different kinds of protective factors. Spirituality and what people call religiosity, which is like you're affiliated with a particular religion, you attend church services, you're involved in religious practices. Those are known to be protective factors that can help people overcome stress. And as Kathleen mentioned, the way how we approach stress or coping style. And those things often make the difference between how people cope. Another thing to also bear in mind is this whole thing of accumulative stress. If you are doing pretty okay in life, things are good with your job, with your children, with your spouse, and you're in fairly good health, you're in a different position compared to somebody who
Right.
probably is already battling ill health. They have a lot of caregiving responsibilities. So that thing can take that person over the edge because they have accumulated stress. And so all of those things together can make a difference to how somebody responds to a stressor or some kind of trauma. I was going to say too, the other thing is that lack of mental health treatment or lack of mental health treatment or access to sources that can help us, even things like a support group, or maybe you're in a small group of a Bible study group. Those things can make the difference too between how someone is, whether they can thrive and overcome, or whether they're going to have a prolonged stress response to whatever the situation is. And the other thing is that if you already have impaired mental health, you're probably going to be less resilient in the face of trauma. So if you're already struggling with depression or anxiety, then it might be a little harder for you to cope with a major trauma compared to someone else.
I really appreciate the doctor brought up the access to mental health. It is key. I mean, if somebody doesn't have the access or the means to get to mental health help, that can mean the difference in everything. Now, the one good thing, if you will, about the pandemic is most have gone, most mental health clinicians have gone virtual. So access in the physical sense has helped.
Wow.
But as far as, do you have insurance? Do you have coverage? Do you have money for copays? If you don't, that might be the difference between you and your ability to cope. That's a great point.
Good. So I just want to clear something up in my own mind. So it sounds like, and I guess I'm trying to figure out, when we talk about a traumatic situation, it sounded like at some point we are saying that what can be traumatic for one person is not traumatic for, or may not be traumatic for another person based on their coping skills or their resiliency. I don't know if that's the right one, the reason, because it sounds like you had it, but you bounced back from it. It was traumatic, but you bounced back from it. But it's just how they deal with the event. That's one thing I'd want to deal with. And then I know we've done this a little bit, but I was supposed to ask you, and I'm just trying to follow my script here. We've named some of these things that are traumatic or that cause trauma, particularly over this past, 2020 up to now. But I just like to just dive in on that and just what are some of the other things, maybe some things we've already mentioned, maybe some other things that we didn't. And I'd like for our audience to join us in that. Some events that have taken place that you may consider traumatic experiences over the last 14, 15 months. What would be some of those that we could categorize as traumatic events, and particularly that may have impacted people's mental health?
So we've seen an upsurge in domestic violence during the pandemic, and certain kinds of crimes. So those are typical ones that come to mind. As I mentioned before, child abuse and neglect. There's this, I'm not sure if you've all heard the term, it's becoming more popular, ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. A study was done a couple of years ago, but what they recognize is that several things that happen to children can trigger trauma. So they talk about having a parent incarcerated, living with a parent or loved one who has severe mental illness. We have things such as experiencing homelessness is a major source of trauma for some. Then we have things such as losing a parent to divorce or losing a parent to death. So these are some more common everyday things that happen to people that can be sources of trauma. So it's not just the dramatic things like you were sexually assaulted or you were raped or you were human trafficked. Remember, it's the perception that what's happening to me is harmful and this is threatening to my survival. So some of those things that I've mentioned can um, trigger that perception in people, and it can lead to various ways in which we respond. So responding to your question, Pastor, we make the distinction between the event and the circumstances that we perceive to be threatening. All of those, whatever they are, is what we call trauma. We make a distinction between that and the trauma response, how we respond to trauma. And we're saying that some people's response can become prolonged and unhealthy and impair their health. So, and in some cases can lead to mental health issues.
So here's a follow-up, and maybe Kathleen, you might want to deal with this. So, and I see a question from Jennifer: hate crimes affecting our society. How can we address these in SDA churches? So we did a program a few months ago on hate in the Asian community and how the Asian community was experiencing. So the what's the word? So the perpetrators of hate crimes against Asians. Could it be that some of them are responding to what they believe is trauma? Like they believe that the pandemic is Asian, the fault of the Asians that they come across. And so they are inflicting drama because they feel like they have been experiencing trauma. Did I say drama? I meant trauma. Could it be that interplay? I have experienced trauma, so I'm going to inflict some trauma on someone else. Is that in play, or just as the question that Jennifer asked, as it reads, how are hate crimes affecting our society, and what's the interplay of that with trauma? Just going on around. And I'm sorry, I had one more question. I know I'm stacking them. I was looking at this, the January 6th, right? So how a certain segment of our society responded to something like an election. Were those people experiencing trauma? Was that an acting out of a traumatic experience that their candidate lost? Or how does trauma impact those social, not just your individual personal stuff, but how does it impact those larger societal movements, the Black Lives Matter, those type of things? Is there trauma involved that impacts large numbers of people at the same time so that they kind of move and act and think in concert? What's the impact of those elements with mental health and trauma?
That was a lot of questions.
I know, I'm sorry. I'll do better next time.
Let me see if I can try and answer some of them.
I didn't mean to traumatize you.
You did, actually, but I'm resilient. I want to answer one of your questions by piggybacking on something that Dr. Nelson said in one of her answers to one of your earlier questions, which was some of the trauma that kids experience. And they don't have to be as dramatic, like she pointed out. One of those things can be just change in general, kids' ability to handle change, like going from school to virtual learning, but also bullying. And bullying is very traumatic, right? Now, here's one thing I want to offer is that kids are resilient. If they get, like I said earlier, the earlier the intervention, the better the longer term outcomes. So if a child has access to the proper resources, that's a big if, but if they have access to the proper resources, kids can be amazingly resilient and they can come through these difficult times or bullying or whatever with greater ease. Now that's again a given if they have all the access to the right resources. Now you were talking about the hate crimes. Well, I often wonder if that's a form of bullying. And if that's a form of bullying, then one would wonder when you look at children who are bullied and they grow to be bullies. And so were they bullied as a child? Now, so should we be just okay with that because they go forth and bully because you have a different belief system? Of course not. From my standpoint as a mental health professional, what we've done in our hospital in the beginning, when the need, I like to say, when the need for the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, because it's been going on for a while, but it resurged in such a big way. When that occurred, we had our Department of Equity and Diversity step forward and do a lot of great work internally for our organization. But from the mental health standpoint, we tried to start some support groups for people to just be able to offload their feelings. So what to do about that was we created a platform for folks to be able to just in a safe space be able to talk about how it was affecting them. And some were admitting that it was very traumatic because, again, when you think about trauma, and I think Dr. Nelson talked about this, it can be a trigger from a memory. And so if you had family that talked to you about stories of things that they went through, or if you went through them yourself, and now these things have come up, these hate crimes have come up, they may re-trigger you and they may make you fearful or have some of these other symptoms that we've talked about, where maybe you're having nightmares and things like that. And so finding a support group or finding mental health to be able to offload in a safe place, or even finding groups of peers that have like experiences so that you can safely talk. And that's not complaining without resolve. It's being able to have that safe environment where you can really talk about how this is affecting you, because the more you offload and let it out, the less it will manifest itself and come back in destructive ways, right? In ways that might affect your mood or might affect you physically as well, where it starts to make you actually physically ill, or just affect things like, just, I don't mean to say that, but it may affect things like your sleep, like your appetite, gaining weight, losing weight, that sort of thing.
Wow.
Did I get to all those questions, Doctor? You want to fill in some of that for me?
I think we have to make a distinction between when people perpetrate hate crimes, and most often hate crimes are perpetrated based on a lot of stereotyping, and as the term suggests, hatred towards a particular group. And many, if we think about the history of the country and just the history of every country has hate crimes. Typically, people who are perpetrating hate crimes have some kind of power and privilege over the groups against which they are perpetrating the crime. And they may be concerned about losing dominance, or they may come to perceive they've come to perceive these persons as either like immoral. For example, there are a lot of hate crimes against persons who are on the LGBTQ spectrum. They perceive them as immoral and a danger to the society. So I think we have to make that distinction. It's important to note, though, that if your group is being attacked through hate crimes, that can lead to secondhand trauma. So, for example, it would not be surprising to find out that a lot of persons in the Asian community are feeling afraid and are having traumatic response symptoms because of what they see taking place. And a good example of this, what the research has shown, is that whenever there are examples of crimes like police brutality against Black people or people of color, there is stress in those communities in which those persons live. People become very afraid. They're concerned about, what if I get stopped by the police, and so on. So whenever these kinds of incidents come in the news, there's a second-hand trauma that people experience, because they begin to say, oh, if that could happen to that person, that could also happen to me.
Wow, wow. Yeah, I want us to switch a little bit to we talked about trauma and mental health in open society. I be honest with you, when I came up in the church, mental health was not a topic we talked about. We pretty much, if someone acted crazy, we would say they're crazy or they're eccentric, or something's they're not right. But I am now, and I reflect back to my pastoral duties, I am beginning to wonder if mental health has been a major issue in the church. And I can't, I don't realize, I don't think there is any. Do you know if there's a particular stance? Both of you may not know this terms of being leaders in the church, but as professionals in the church, is there a particular stance the church has on mental health issues?
I was so recently, well, last year, the Health Ministries Department of the General Conference, in getting ready to launch a particular initiative to address mental health, especially among youth, refer to mental health as a global crisis. So certainly the church does recognize that mental health is an issue, and the director of health ministry and the associate directors, they cited lots of statistics, for example, on suicide, and um, and about how mental health is the leading cause of disability in the world. So many of us may not recognize that, but many lost hours of productivity, absence from work, needing to take time off from work is often due to mental health issues, not physical health issues. And if we think about other statistics that tell us that one in every four girls are sexually abused, and 1 in every 13 boys. That's an example of a childhood trauma. And we think about the prevalence of anxiety and depression. It is certainly something that's prevalent. I think that for years, we've always equated mental health to psychotic behavior, to the bizarre, out of control behavior, that we did not recognize things like depression and anxiety, and recognize and things like autism, that these are also types of mental health. And I think that kind of dramatic negative picture has probably also helped to contribute to mental health stigma. So people are scared to come out and say, listen, I'm having a hard time sleeping. I don't feel any pleasure in life. Sometimes I wonder what's the point of living, because you don't want to get labeled as somebody who's mentally ill, because then persons think you are a lunatic. So I think we have these images that have made it really difficult for people to come out and share.
Yeah, let me say this. I mean, this discussion is great. I think it's needed, not only for our viewers but for pastors, right? I mean, I think that pastors, as well as the wider community, go through these adverse situations, and if we are not resilient. I think you use that word resiliency, right? If we're not resilient, or if we're not able to bounce back, then to be able to identify that or be aware of that. And as you said, when you were speaking to the pastors, probably get some help, right? So what should be the relationship then between the pastor, mental health professionals, not just for a resource for the church, but a resource for the pastor? And then how can this relationship assist or strengthen and let's just talk about the pastor. I'm going to be very, how can it strengthen the pastor? How can the pastor be benefit? How can the pastor benefit from this, the counseling situation, and how can we bypass this stigma that only those who are well, we talk about mental disorder. I don't know if we define mental disorder, the distinction between that and so forth, but how can we bypass this stigma that only those who are on the DSM, and there's certain things on this DSM that constitute a mental illness that not only requires the relationship with the counselor, but also some things that we have to live with. And when people are in this counseling setting, there are a lot of people say, "Oh no, why are you going to that? No, no." How can we bypass this stigma? What should the relationship be between the pastor and the mental health
I'm gonna
counselor?
be right back. I need to go and Google DSM. All right.
Diagnostic.
Physical
Go ahead.
manual.
Yeah,
Hey,
you're
My
doing
wife is
it
a
right
mental health
now.
therapist. She's a mental health therapist. So.
You're doing it right now. You're doing exactly, you just answered your own question. You're educating yourselves. And that's key. And I think to put it in context, you talked about well, maybe is it around more now, or was it always around in the church? It probably always was around in the church, and we didn't know what to call it. Modern day, now we have all this. Dr. Nelson has quoted all these statistics, and there's data and there's research to support all these things. And then they categorize people, and they have these diagnoses that go into the diagnostic statistical manual that's used by psychiatrists and other clinicians to diagnose people. But it's really the educational piece, isn't it? And then it's as simple as lead by example. So if you're going to be right with yourself, and it's a lot, what I talked to some of you this past week about was self-care. Checking in, making sure, am I traumatized by some of what's happened this past year? Am I right with myself? Am I doing my congregation, my family, my friends, any kind of a disservice because maybe I'm having nightmares, maybe I'm having trouble sleeping, maybe I'm having some of these symptoms of stress or trauma. And so if I'm having these symptoms, I better make sure that I'm okay with me before I try and go in and recognize it in somebody else. Dr. Nelson, I'm certain will agree with me. As clinicians, we have to always be self-aware. And when we're not, we got to listen when others tap us on the shoulder and say, you seem really stressed. You seem really overwhelmed, right? We have to pay attention to ourselves, because if we don't, we're going to miss it in other people. And if we want to be our best selves, then we've got to have that self-care component. And if as pastors or leaders of your church, you need to be on your best game. And if folks are listening in and are parents or siblings or friends, you need to be well with yourself. And so it's all about education, getting the word out, which is what you're doing on this platform. You're educating people about what is trauma, what is mental health, what is mental unhealth, how do I get help, how do I recognize these symptoms. All this is really, really important in order to continue to better ourselves as a whole. And so what you're doing right now, you've answered your own question. You're educating the public, you're educating yourself, you're learning what is important. And when you see somebody that might have some symptoms, or they might be something as simple as someone coming to you and saying, you know what, I can't sleep anymore. It's a perfect opportunity to delve a little deeper and figure out what's going on, because usually if somebody's sleep is disrupted, it could be physical or it could be emotional. Have them check out both.
Okay.
Dr. Wilson, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say too that for speaking from the pastoral perspective, that whether it's going to counseling or therapy, but I know a number of professionals also use what they call wellness coaches. And many of them are trained in, they are mental health professionals. They're licensed clinical social workers, or they're licensed counselors. So I would say that's a good thing for pastors to use if they can afford a wellness coach. And that is certainly less stigmatizing. The other thing that I would suggest is that I'm sure in your circle, you know them, there are persons who are more open about talking about mental health issues, or who have admitted that they've struggled with mental health, or that they've gone to counseling, or that they are in counseling. I think it's important to have small groups, whether they're on Facebook, they may be a closed private group, but know who are the people that you can reach out to in your professional circle, or perhaps outside of your professional circle. Like you have a friend who is a clinician, but certainly to know who are those people that you can reach out to if you really feel like your mental health is straining, or if you're seeing loss of interest in the typical activities that you would be interested in eating, the things that you find pleasurable, including sex. I think that's a good one to start with for men. Sex, food, entertainment, feeling like it takes everything last thing out of you to have to go to work. Those are some signs that you're probably suffering with depression, or you might be struggling with anxiety. So, knowing some of those signs are important, and knowing who you can reach out to.
Let me ask this question quick, and I know that there's some other questions there. I think but this is you said some key things, and again, you talk about this adverse study, the ACE study. Adverse child experience. We could spend a whole show on that, right? Trying to develop a community within our church and our children, doing what we can so that we can negate some of those negative experiences. So as they grow, they at least have some positive memories. But here's something that you said: self-awareness. So how does one, it's going to sound like a simple question, but how does one develop this self-awareness? Because sometimes we feel, as pastors, I'm going to talk to the pastors, we're perfect, we could do no wrong, we pray. And so I could just shake it off. I feel down for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but I could shake it off. I could just pray and shake it off. How can one develop this self-awareness so that he or she can detect some of the signs that all is not well?
I would start with being open to the idea of your own mental health, right? And do you feel better when you do take care of yourself? Are you noticing a difference? And Dr. Nelson talked about some of the symptoms, finding yourself with low motivation or just a real struggle to get yourself out of bed. If some of these things strike you, then it's important. I think as pastors, you wear it like a badge of honor. You wear these struggles like I can muddle through just one more day, and I just one more a person that needs help can come to me. I'm never tired. But you're human, and you've got to see yourself that way. You have to see yourself as fallible and as a human. And that self-awareness comes with more and more education and just being open to the fact. Oftentimes you start prayers with, open my heart to, right, fill in the blank. Open my heart to being self-aware. Open my heart to recognizing or listening to those trusted colleagues and those trusted. I'm wagging my finger. I'm shaming you right now. I'm not really, but listening to those trusted colleagues, those trusted friends that say, "Man, you look wiped out. You look really tired. You okay?" "I'm fine." Stop and think for a minute. This person cares about me, and there's somebody I trust if they're seeing it. And we know that getting help doesn't make you any less strong. It makes you stronger. We know that seeking help is something that is so important. Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It shows you have the courage to admit when you don't know something and learn something new. So says Barack Obama. So seeking help is becoming stronger. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that there. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elder.
No. I'm
Okay.
just agreeing.
Yeah. So I know, and I this was not planned either, but there are days that as a pastor, I don't feel like going to church. There have been days I don't feel like preaching. I don't feel like going to church because I don't want to deal with, yeah, I'm trying to get my head wrapped around my sermon or something, but I know somebody's going to come and talk to me about the length of the praise team skirts or and I'm just going to get bombarded with all kind of stuff. There are those times where that can get you, along with even your personal stuff. You've got your own stuff. Stuff is happening with the house. Stuff is happening with your spouse. Stuff is happening with your whatever, your finances and all of those things. And you know that you are not right, but then I got to get up here in this desk in this pulpit and talk to everybody else about them getting themselves right. Does that pastor, does he just say, okay, time out, peace, I'm not doing this today? What does he or she do when they are wrestling with their own? Is it the fake it till you make it sort of a posture, or I'm sorry, let's go with faith it. Let's go with that. Faith it till you make it.
Hey.
And listen, and I'm saying this in the context of ministry, but the thing is this, that we have Sabbath school superintendents and elders and personal ministry directors who are getting up in church, basically in an essence, faking the funk, just trying to get through the thing while they are still struggling and there's stuff going on. And they don't want to be there. They don't want to be doing this thing, but there's a commitment. There's a commitment to the Lord. There's a commitment to his people. There's a commitment to the work that they've got to follow through. And if they're faithful here with this stuff, then somehow God's going to sprinkle some pixie dust and fix all of the other baggage that's got them to this place. What do they do? How do they deal with that?
I'll go first. I would
Okay, and I'll
say
sit
that
on my hands and wait.
I would say as a pastor, you have resources. You can always invite someone else in to preach. You have a team of elders. Many of them are capable preachers. And there might be some administrative functions that for a while you can ask someone else to take up. I think what Kathleen is talking about getting to your breaking point. If you are realizing you're under this severe strain, you have to look at your plate and say, is there something I can take off my plate? Can I take a church responsibility off my plate for the next 2 weeks? Or it might be a responsibility that you have outside of church. Can I take something else off my plate? Can I delay this thing that I needed to deal with? I think you need a kind of awareness and not feel like if you're at breaking point that you have to try and push through all the time. So I think that's important in terms of your planning. As professors, we go through the same thing, and I got to ask myself, are there things I can ask my student worker to do? Are there things I can ask my graduate assistant to do? This semester at Southern, with a lot of students having mental health issues, the administrators reached out to us and said, think about your courses. Is there an assignment that you could take off the plate, but people would still learn the content? So sometimes you have to think about, am I trying to be this perfectionist? Can I just preach part one this week and people will be blessed, right? So I think there's always things that you can do to take one thing off your plate that can allow you to survive. And if it's that critical, you may need to take FMLA for 2 days or whatever it is.
Wow.
Yep, I think that there's a word for what you were describing. It's called presenteeism. You show up, but you're not really there.
Mercy.
You show up and your heart isn't really there. And people do that when they're distracted. And being distracted by your frustrations, your fatigue, all that is a sure sign that you need to do exactly what the doctor just ordered, which is to take a step back. Now, I said this last week to the pastors that you're all a bunch of type A's. You didn't get to this position, right, without being really hardworking people. And that's great. It's a great quality, but it can kill you too if you don't take care of yourselves. And so if there's a way to lighten your plate, the church is not going to fall if you take a day or two for self-care. And you were saying about how you got to commit to God, you got to commit to the church, you got to commit to your congregation. What about committing to you? There's no sin in that. You must take care of yourself. If you want to be the best at what it is that you do, then you must take care of yourself so you can rejuvenate, you can re-energize. And we become more motivated. We become less distracted when we take a break. It's what you do when you get off the pulpit. What you do that lifts you to make you feel better will then in turn help you to become more motivated when you go back. You've got to commit to yourselves.
Listen, okay, so one more I'd like for both of you to comment on this before we get to our last question. So for the pastor or for the church members, I'd like you to speak to the pastor or the group of church members who, when that church officer comes to the board and says, I need a timeout, I'm burnt out, I need to quit, I need some time for myself. And then the pastor pressures, oh, you signed up for this and the Lord has got you. He's going to take you through this. Just stay with it, hang with it. We're going to, that pressure that comes. Or the church members who, when the pastor says, I need to take this break, oh, there's something wrong with the pastor. There's something, he's not spiritual enough. She's not cut out for this role. What counsel would you give to the church leadership or the church membership who is looking at it from the other side and they're just prone to kind of not really be supportive or prone to be critical of the steps when an individual says, I need to take these steps in order to maintain my mental health?
Boundaries. Set your boundaries. If somebody is telling you, oh, we just can't do it without you, you've got to be strong. You've got to set your boundaries. This is about your survival. It's about your mental health.
And what do you say to the people who are saying that to the people who need the boundaries?
I would
The
also
the
say, go
Move.
ahead.
Go ahead, doctor.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I would also say that we have to remind everyone in the church that it's God's church, and you have to trust God to send Joshua.
Mm.
You don't need to have this mindset. Okay, Moses is going to die, but God is going to send Joshua,
Come on.
right?
Wow,
Preach.
wow.
Come on.
So sometimes as members of the church, we can lose sight of God. We can get like Isaiah and Uzziah, we can get wrapped up in this is the only person who can lead this ministry and
Wow.
blah, blah, blah. That means you have made the person an idol.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to trust God to bring leadership there. No one person in the church has a particular gift. God will raise up somebody. There's already somebody there with that
Mm-hmm.
gift that we probably didn't even think of because they don't fit our mindset of what the AYS leader should look like. But trust